I actually have like depressing news. Today is my last day at Gold Gym. I have to freeze my membership here for 3 months, and today is like my billing cycle day, so it's the last day I get to go in there. I'm just sad I have to leave it, but I was like, this is sort of a good opportunity to like record my last day there. And I thought, since I'm hitting legs, and I don't want to hear, I literally do train upper body, but I feel like I just record when I hit legs. But since I'm training legs, it's the perfect opportunity to give you guys like an informative video about how to grow your glutes. And just to be clear, I'm going to be talking about the fitness aspect and the exercise aspect of growing your glutes. There is a huge portion of it that is, I feel like all of it is due to your nutrition. So you obviously have to be eating more to be growing your glutes. And just to like summarize it quickly, you need to be hitting your protein intake. And I personally recommend a high carb diet. I think high protein, high carb is the way to efficiently grow any muscle part. When you pair that with the right training, you know, I went to go get myself water, and my water's in like a Brita in the fridge, but like one of those like pori Britas. And but I meal prepped yesterday, so there's like something sitting in like in a pot in the fridge, right? And it has this reflection. Look at what I look like. I'm just filling my water and I like can't stop making eye contact with myself. So goofy.
The very first thing that we're going to talk about is glute activation. Across the board on like every social media platform, there's tons of people who sort of shit on glute activation, and at the very least, if you feel it has no benefits, it's a nice way to warm up. And of course, there's other ways to warm up. You don't have to use a band, you don't have to do these exact movements that I'm doing, but for your safety, warm up. The glute activation is just one part of my warm up. I also do a ton of different exercises to get my ankles warm, to get my hips warm, etc. However, I swear by glute activation. As a girl who's heavily quad dominant, I'm really proud of the glute progress I made, and warming up my glutes like this before every leg day has made the world's difference. I do high rep, low rest periods to get that pump and burn, and then go straight into my compound lifts. This helps so much with my mind to muscle connection. I never felt exercises in my glute until I did this, and sometimes if I'm losing that mind to muscle connection, during my third or fourth set, I start supersetting a few banded glute exercises right before my compound lift, and it helps so much. So we should know by now that squats are mainly a quad-focused exercise. You can make that exercise recruit the glutes more with different like variations, maybe a wider stance and maybe going below parallel. But they're primarily going to work the quads. And for this reason, a lot of girls mainly feel squats in their quads, and I'm a part of that group. And it gets worse as my sets go on, as I furthered away from my glute activation. So I tried to sometimes superset them with like banded glute work, and it's changed the entire game for me. For example, I might incorporate 24 banded side steps right before my squat set, and it gets a lot easier to connect and push through my glutes. The second thing we're going to talk about is a compound movement, and we sort of touched on it a little bit. Compound lifts are lifts that are using more than one muscle group at the same time. Squats, deadlifts, etc. are all examples of this. Because they are larger lifts and they use more than one muscle group and joint at the same time, it's easier to push more weight on these lifts and add stress to your glutes that they wouldn't see in an isolation movement. Compound lifts should be a staple in your routine, and you should start off your workouts with 2 to 3 compound lifts and then end with isolation movements. Squats are an amazing compound lift, and I wouldn't exclude them, but if your main goal is glute gains, I would incorporate these at a minimum. The same way I would incorporate leg extensions, a leg press at a minimum. These things are going to mostly target your quads. That doesn't mean you won't see glute gains if you squat. I would just primarily focus on other compound lifts that have more glute activation, like hip thrust, RDLs, and chest forward lunges. Squats can be manipulated to target more of your glutes like I stated before, but you can't take away the fact that squats will primarily target your quads. For every lift that you complete, you want to focus on progressive overload. That means as time goes on, you want to increase the stress you're adding to your muscle. This can be done a ton of ways, and the simplest way is by increasing your weight. So let's say you're hitting a 100-pound squat for 10 reps, you want to try to work towards 120 for 10 reps by the end of 1 or 2 months. This will require a steady increase in stress over time to achieve that, and your muscle group will grow under the increasing stress. I talked about this on my Instagram, but increasing weight is not the only way to progressive overload. You can also increase the time under tension, let's say by playing around with the tempo of your workout. Take the weight that you would normally hip thrust for 10 reps and now include a 4-second negative on each rep. You might find that adding longer negatives might make that same weight impossible to hit for 10 reps, but that's how you'll work your way back up. You can also increase range of motion by adding a deficit. You can add plates or a platform under your feet, and that'll increase the path length that the weight travels. You can also very simply just work on increasing the reps for the same weight. Take the 100-pound hip thrust that you do for 8 reps and work on getting it to 15 reps before you move on to another weight class. You can also, let's say, increase the volume by adding one more set to your regular 4-set hip thrust. Something else that I want to go over is the topic of heavy weightlifting. A lot of people hear heavy weightlifting is like good for gains and start weightlifting and always hit those lower rep ranges of 1 to 4 to try to make sure they're pushing high numbers. While you can see gains with strength training, it's not required to be constantly hitting those lower rep ranges to push heavy numbers. I mean, I just went over like a bunch of examples of how you can progressively overload without ever touching your weight. Me personally, I hardly ever strength train. You can work on increasing your weight in the higher rep ranges and it would still be equally as effective, and those higher rep ranges are better for hypertrophy, which means muscle gain. The third thing that I'm going to talk about is glute isolation movements. These movements should come at the end of your workout. These are the lifts that I typically shoot for even higher rep ranges and lower weight. Isolation movements allow you to do this in a more convenient way than compound lifts because reaching really high rep ranges in compound lifts would cause fatigue to one of the muscle groups. And we know that compound lifts work a lot of muscle groups, and for a lot of the compound lifts, the primary muscle group is not the glute, except for hip thrusts, of course. So with the goal of glute gains, it's not ideal to push these higher rep ranges in compound lifts, like let's say for the squat, because pushing higher rep ranges would mean that the secondary muscle groups would fatigue first, which is the glutes, and you're left running on quad and hamstring activation. Isolation exercises target less muscle groups than compound lifts and can help add more emphasis to that muscle group, let's say the glutes. You move after your compound lifts that hit multiple muscle groups and start targeting the individual group of the many worked in the bigger lifts that you want to grow the most. The very last thing that I want to talk about is high volume training. I swear by high volume training in isolation movements, and even now and then I incorporate high volume training in my bigger lifts, but I make sure not to like completely stress myself out by doing heavy weights. Look, I'll be real here, high volume training is like super controversial, just like glute activation, but I'll tell you why I think the way that I do. A lot of people are against high volume training. They say it's completely useless, say you can train for the lower rep ranges across every lift and still see the same results. And they do have studies and sources that back up their claims. But here's the thing, while they can find sources that support their claims, there's also studies that support high volume training. Or for example, studies that support glute activation. All this says is that this topic is under-researched. So there's usually going to be a study that supports everything. I don't know, there's probably a study out there that took individuals who were smoking cigarettes and checked and saw that their lungs were completely fine. So their study concluded that cigarettes does not cause any damage to the lungs. We know that that's not true, right? But things like that can happen, and that's why before you can make a conclusion about something, you need so many studies to be available. This topic, among many things fitness related, are just under-researched. So just because 1 or 2 studies point in one direction or the other does not make it completely viable. We need to see more and conduct more significant research to make a conclusion. So my advice to you is to go by trial and error. When I started weightlifting, I did extremely high reps with low weight because I was scared and just new to the gym. I didn't see many gains. Then I heard about heavy weightlifting, so I moved on to extremely heavy weight with low reps, and I saw some gains, but not too much. And then I got to the point where I added a variation of the two. I train for strength every now and then in the lower rep ranges, but mostly I'm hitting the 10 to 12 to 15 rep range, and then every now and then you see extremely high volume training. Now, high volume training is taxing. I'm not saying do this every day. You really do need to give your body a break. The same way I said that strength training all the time isn't good, you do not want to exhaust yourself by going high volume training. But that is when I saw the most progress, and especially when I started incorporating high volume training. And I'm not the only person to say this. There's a ton of people online that swear by high volume training. I am one of those people.
Like I mentioned earlier, the biggest thing to gaining muscle anywhere, including your glutes, is what you eat. So I already had my protein shake post-workout. Cut to me drinking my shake. But I also am going to be eating this meal. I've got carbs, protein. The only thing I'm missing is fats, to be honest. And I've got a lot of carbs, a lot of protein. I also had my protein shake. I happen to like a high carb, high protein meal post-workout. I would usually include some fats in here like avocado toast, but I ran out of avocados. But I also want to mention the important thing is not like making sure you eat right after your meal, but it's making sure that you eat enough throughout your day. So the timing of meals don't matter as much as it matters to make sure that you're eating everything that you need to be eating. I hope you guys like this video. You can like, comment, subscribe, and welcome to the family.